Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. Thank you all for coming and hanging out with us on this we are in week 20 of our Effects on Violin series. And digo, hola Teo, ¿qué vale un violín eléctrico? Pues todos los precios son en nuestro sitio en el internet electricviolinshop.com. Tiene precios por todo que está aquí detrás de mí. So, hola que lo contesta pregunta. So, yeah, I just said that all the pricing on these violins is on our website, electricviolinshop.com. If you have questions about pricing or availability, all that stuff is there. So, yeah, thanks for asking. Gracias por su pregunta. Y bienvenidos. So, today we're going to be talking about guitar solos on violin. In this series, every week we've been hitting a different effect. Got a bunch of different effects, a bunch of different artists that we've been working with. This week is the amazing Nina DiGregorio. Our interview goes like an hour. Hola, Edison, de Uruguay. Bueno, bienvenido. So pretty much every violinist in a rock band has wanted to play guitar solos. And then you're like, about halfway into it, you're like, wow, this is a lot harder than it sounds. Maybe I can get all the notes, but getting it to sound right is not as easy as them guitar players make it look. And part of that is because the mechanics of playing the guitar are very different from the violin. It's not just the pick versus the bow. The bridges are different shapes. They're tuned in fourths, more or less, versus fifths. The range of a guitar is different. The rhythm guitar playing is very difficult to copy on a violin, if not impossible. Tracy Silverman probably does the best job of anybody, and there's a lot of stuff that he doesn't even go after. So yeah, they can play a lot of stuff that we can't play, and vice versa. But I do want to show you a quick video, just a quick demo that I did this morning to kind of explain some of that. Fiddle music has a unique sound to it, and a lot of that sound is because it's written to take advantage of the unique construction of a violin. We use the fact that the violin is tuned in fifths, that we like using open strings, that we try to stay mostly in first position. That's why fiddle music sounds the way it does. Similarly, the entire canon of rock and roll has been recorded with the mechanics of the guitar in mind. Now, I know a lot of you guys don't play guitar, so we're going to walk through some of the unique attributes of a guitar so you can understand kind of what we're dealing with when we're trying to copy what guitars can do. First of all, the range of a guitar. The high E string on a guitar, they have two E strings. The high E string on a guitar is an octave below our high E string. Next one down is a fourth down. It's a B. It would be like second finger on our G string. Next string down is a third below that, a major third, G, which is equivalent to our open G string. And then it's all fourths down from there. We've got a D, which would be first string or first finger on the C string for a violin. A, which would be second finger on the F string of a six string violin. And then E, which would be third finger on the B flat string of a seven string violin. So they can make whole chords at a time. They can play 6 whole notes at a time, which is really handy if you're a guitar player. The minor pentatonic scale, which is the building block of blues and jazz and rock and roll, there are patterns that they can use on the neck. They can very easily play a minor pentatonic scale in any key, anywhere on the neck. They're just little patterns. It's also fairly easy to play complex chords with just a simple shape of your hand, much harder to do on the violin. And then there's the whole thing that Tracy Silverman has gone after, which is a lot of the muting and the percussive playing that they can do. Much, much easier to do on the guitar than on the violin. So, that's the bad news about trying to cop guitar rhythm stuff. Trying to go after guitar solos, though, is a little easier. They often try to do more violin-y type things when they're taking solos. More single and double note lines instead of like these 6-note chords. They're trying to be more lyrical. They're trying to be more melodic. a lot smoother. A lot of times they're doing things to make their picks sound more like a bow, which is great for us when we're trying to copy them. So I also wanted to talk about range on guitars. What I didn't show you is, I showed you the low end of a guitar. The high end, the 24th fret on a guitar, which is about as high as most of them go, would be like the harmonic E on our E string, just up from third position. So if you're third position or lower on a violin, you can cover all the stuff that a guitar can do, assuming you have the low end for you. So we don't have to come way, way, way up the neck and do all that squealy stuff on the violin. So top end of the range is very, very easy for us. Bottom end of the range, you are going to need some extra strings, 6 and 7 string violin if you're trying to go after guitar solos. So just to keep that in mind, that's what's happening with the range on a guitar versus a violin. So very quickly, I'm going to introduce my friend Nina. She is going to chat about this stuff for about an hour because she's got a lot of stuff to say and she's really, really good at this. So how did you start deciding as a violinist, I want to start going after all these crazy guitar solos and stuff? What made you decide to start doing that?
My dad had a DVD of this documentary about Woodstock, the original Woodstock, and I watched it, and I saw Jimi Hendrix do the Star Spangled Banner, in the crazy Jimi Hendrix way that he does. And I was like, I need to do this. And I had bought this really cheap, the kind of electric violin that you always advise people not to buy from eBay. And I bought one of those because I was, 12 or 13 years old and I didn't have any money. And I plugged it into my dad's Marshall amp and I messed with all the settings on it. And when my parents came home from work one day, I was like, oh, look what I can do. And that was kind of my very first attempt at doing what I now do as a career.
That's awesome. You got to start really young. I'm older than you. I don't think they'd invented electric violins yet when I was a kid.
Oh, I'm sure they had them.
Yeah, I'm not quite that old, but I didn't get my first one until I was in my early 20s.
Well, I didn't get my first good one until I was in my early 20s. So people ask all the time about whether or not they need a really expensive instrument. And to me, the way it sounds, people are concerned with how the electric violin sounds when you just plug it in. Well, what does this electric violin sound like? Or what does that one sound like? Well, I could even make a really bad electric violin sound good with a really good effects rig. And I think you're for two things: for staying in tune and for the playability factor of it. And you really don't want to compromise on any of that. So yeah, if you can get a really good violin and a really good effects rig, that's great. But if you can only afford a medium violin that stays in tune well enough, go for the more expensive effects rig is what I always tell people.
Yeah, I think especially if you're going to be doing a lot of really heavy processing, right?
Yeah, especially if you're trying to sound like a guitar, which is how I'm kind of answering these questions because that's what I do. If you're trying to sound like a violin, obviously the natural sound of the instrument is going to matter a bit more to you. But
yeah, it's knowing how to process a signal and transform one sound into another is it's a key skill that a lot of string players don't have.
Definitely, and it doesn't even start with putting the effect on the instrument. It starts way before that. If you're trying to sound like a guitar player, it starts with your eyes and your ears and your fingers before you even can get to the point where you're ready to put an effect on it in terms of sounding like a guitar player instead of sounding like a violinist.
Yeah, I think it's key to you've got to get inside the head of a guitar player. And you play guitar too, right?
I do play guitar a little bit, even though I'm more of a bass player. I've played bass in bands before, and I could strum some chords and get through playing on my backing tracks on guitar, but I would by no means consider myself a pro guitar player.
Yeah, I'm a terrible, terrible guitar player, but I know enough about guitar to know how guitars make sound and how am I going to translate that? How does that translate to the violin is the biggest part for me.
I struggle with that a lot, actually. The things that are really easy to do on a guitar are really difficult to do on a violin. Sometimes it has to do with the type of pickup that's there. Sometimes it has to do with, locking tuners not being present and things like that, or having to intonate frets by physically moving the bridge. It's stuff that is a bit of a handicap to a violinist that a guitar player usually doesn't have to think of those things.
And then the other thing, a lot of times these guitar solos, they are written in such a way that they can use the mechanics of the instrument to their advantage. Like they've got these box patterns that they can just run up and down the neck really easy, and that doesn't necessarily translate to the violin. Sometimes an easy guitar solo can be a hard violin solo.
Yes, that's exactly true, actually. The first thing that I like to do is, well, if you're trying to learn a guitar solo and you look at a piece of guitar music, even with notation, even if you're not talking tabs, you're talking notation, and you try and just play it, you're really not going to be able to do that because, first of all, the guitar sounds an octave lower than it's written. So you're going to be playing it an octave higher than what it's going to sound like when a guitar player plays it, unless you transcribe it down an octave. And also, you're going to see things like bends, and you're going to see hammer-ons and pull-offs, and you're not going to be able to know how to sight read that as a violinist. So the first step that I do is I retranscribe every guitar solo that I play in a way that makes sense to a violinist, because being classically trained, that's what I'm used to. And I can memorize something a lot faster if I transcribe it into notation as well. So everything that I do, I've created an easily readable, specific towards violin that will achieve the same sound as the guitar, but something that's easier for me to read. Then after that, I try and figure out what are the things that makes this guitar player stand out? What are their signature things? And like I just did an AC/DC solo, and Angus Young has these really, kind of sexy bends all the time. They're not the hardest guitar solos, but the way that he uses these bends and his timing on them, how do you duplicate that on a violin? A lot of violinists will just try and slide to emulate a guitar bend. I actually physically bend the string, and I have the bloody fingers to show for it too. So those things matter, and you have to think about all of that before you're even ready to put the effects on the instrument.
I love that. So you're learning to play these solos just dry, no effects whatsoever.
Yeah, that's how I always start out. I learn everything without even the effects are the last thing that I do when I deal with all this. I figure out how to do it. It's like putting together a puzzle. If you're a guitar player and you want to learn how to play Crazy Train, you just go on YouTube and there's 100 people telling you exactly how to do the exact same thing on your instrument. For what we do, where are you going to find it? Who's going to give me a tutorial about how to play Crazy Train the exact way that Randy Rhoads did with the exact effects on my instrument? It just doesn't exist. So you figure out the puzzle pieces first, how you're physically going to achieve the same idea that the guitar player had. A lot of times for me, it comes down to, do I use a portamento or do I use the Digitech whammy? Or do I use a combination of both? And if I use the whammy, do I use a dive bomb? Do I use an octave? Do I use a fifth? Do I just use a third or a second? Because that's going to change the whole feel of what you're trying to achieve with the solo, are your settings for that stuff. The same thing with harmonics. Are you going to do a regular harmonic? Are you going to try and use a false harmonic for that thing? Are you going to try and achieve a squealy pinch harmonic? And I plan all that stuff out before I actually record the solos.
I love that. It's one of the things that I will tell people if they're trying to chase a sound. I'll say, turn off all your effects, get as close to that sound as you can with this right here. And then what's missing, then we can add in with the effects. A lot of people are, well, which knobs do I turn to sound like this? Like, we got a bunch of knobs right here. Let's mess with those first.
Especially fast sections like Eddie Van Halen runs and things like that. The effect is a crutch. If you can do it without the effect, then when you finally add the effect on, you're like, oh, it's not as bad as I thought it was.
Absolutely. So what was the first guitar solo that you learned that you were like, I think I've actually figured out this whole playing like a guitar player thing?
The first guitar solo that I transcribed in its entirety was Terry Kath's solo on the Chicago song 25 or 6 to 4. I was a big fan of Chicago when I was in middle school and high school, and I really loved what the band did, combining rock, jazz, and classical into especially their early albums. And I just love the way Terry Kath played guitar. He doesn't care. He's a man's man. He just goes for it, and he sings the same way, and it's just like a higher power is playing through him when he plays. He plays with that much raw emotion. And so that was the first one that I transcribed, and I might have been, 13 or 14 years old at the time. I did it on paper that I drew lines on because I couldn't afford software yet at the time. And I can't remember how, but I ended up getting a VIP pass to a Chicago concert when they came through Buffalo, where I'm originally from. And I got to go backstage and meet a bunch of them, and they autographed my original copy of my transcription, handwritten copy, and they said something like, keep going, kid, great job, that sort of thing. Or I haven't seen that note to note since Terry played it. And, they kind of gave me some nice encouragement about it. But that was the first one I ever transcribed. And at the time, I think I had this Vox Tone Lab SE, and I really liked like the kind of vintage quality of the sound on it. And I had created a sound for the main solo. And then it's really hard to beat the Vox wah. They had the double wah, like one you could use for volume and one you could use for wah on that board. And I still have one of them. I used to have a bunch of them because unfortunately they don't travel well. But I still have one of them, and that's how I got the sound for that solo.
Now, you mentioned traveling well. You play with a group that does a lot of this. I mean, you're not just doing this on TikTok. You're doing this for money.
Yeah, actually, I did this for money prior to ever being on TikTok. I started a TikTok page and doing these videos on social media during COVID when we weren't allowed to tour anymore. And I was, I think, 9 months pregnant. And I was like, well, I got to do something, because I don't know when I'm going to be able to work again. So I started making videos of the stuff that I play in the show. So I kind of did it the opposite way of how a lot of people do it now. They start on social media, then they have a show. I had a show, and then I couldn't do the show. So I just recorded all the solos I do in the show and started posting them on my page. And, and it's actually been mutually beneficial because now more people buy tickets to the show because they've seen it on social media. So it's kind of gone hand in hand. And I think both things are important, having the live experience and also keeping up with your social media.
Yeah, for sure. So for people who don't know, why don't you tell them about your band and about your show?
So I created first I created an electric string quartet in Las Vegas with some other musicians that we would play in the shows here on the Strip when artists would come through town or when there'd be residencies, and we were all friends. And that group's called Bella Electric Strings. And I took all of these arrangements that I'd been writing since I was 12, 13 years old of my favorite rock songs and pop songs and metal songs for string quartet. And we created backing tracks for them. And we performed them for corporate events. So that's kind of how it started. And we were able to make a really good living in Las Vegas doing the Bella Electric Strings rock string quartet arrangements for corporates. And one day there was an attendee at one of the corporate events who ran a theater in New Mexico, like an actual, I don't know if it was a 600 or 700 seat theater. They're like, this is really unique what you guys are doing. Do you ever do ticketed shows? I'd love to have you at my theater. So of course I said yes, and then figured it out later. And so at that point we had a date on the books, I think a year ahead of time, and I decided to write a show. So I wrote all these specialty arrangements that are like more medley centric and less, full songs like we would do for a corporate event. So it's bam, 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 high energy stuff. Rehearsed the band, wrote rhythm charts for them, did some vocal rehearsals because I was like, you know what? It's good to do instrumentals, but we should do half and half just to make it. And none of us are singers. We're all, musicians, but we're not singers. So we tend to do the gang vocal type thing on stage. And people sometimes will ask, well, why don't you have a lead singer front the show? I'm like, because then it's not your show anymore. The whole point of this show was to like bring the strings out of the pit orchestra and let them front the show. So we'll feature guest singers like my husband, Brody, who's a pro singer. He'll sit in with us and sing, but we don't have a complete full-time lead singer. We just do the vocals ourselves. So anyways, the show came and sold out, our very first show that we booked. And at that point, we started booking more shows and actually thinking of that where we never even tried to do that before. We were just focusing on corporate events. And then once the first show went well and we saw the crowd's reaction and, that we could actually have a different source of income that was more fun than playing corporate events, we really pursued it. And it's really a mom and pop operation. I have 2 employees that work for me, and I have, I don't have an exclusive agent, but I have a few that I work with that help us in various areas that they cover. And a lot of it is just shaking hands and kissing babies. So that's where we're at now.
Yeah, that's the entertainment business. You do a lot of baby kissing.
Yeah.
We've been doing a series about different effects on violin. We're at week 16 or 17 or 18 or something now. And we've been teaching people about all these different effects one by one. I'd love for you to talk about, like, how do you take your knowledge of individual effects and then combine that in order to make a cohesive sound or a full sound? Because each solo that you're going after, there's not just one effect in each one of those. There's a combination of effects, right?
Right. And as any guitar player will tell you, their pedal board is a ever evolving entity. It's never complete, never done. You're never completely happy with it. You could just go on, and as soon as you think you're happy with it, something new comes out. But so basically, my rig isn't too crazy, but I also have to create my sounds two different ways sometimes. Sometimes when you record through Logic or Pro Tools or whatever you're using, the sound is going to sound different than it does when you're, blowing through a giant PA system at a performing arts center or a casino showroom or a arena or something like that. And so every time I record something new, I'll kind of research how the guitar player did it. And you can kind of get close, but the EQ is going to be a lot different with the violin. And, I think EQ and compression are kind of two of the most important things with changing from what a guitar player would do to exactly what a violin player would do. And when I do the studio work, I'm really lucky because my husband Brody, his main instrument is keyboard, and you know that keyboard players, they just love to make sounds. That's their thing. That's sound like this or something. He can usually, between the two of us, we get it pretty close, and he does like the final mastering on the audio because I don't want to put out cell phone quality recordings. I'll record the video and the audio and then, professionally mix the audio and then put it out so that people have a quality listening experience with things. But my live rig, so for the studio rig, I'm pretty much just using Helix native software, which is the plugin for Logic, where you can use all the same effects family as the big Helix board that you can gig with and things like that. But I don't have to bend down and turn buttons and knobs. I could loop a section and then just mess with it with the mouse and figure out what sounds best. And also it's helpful because we did a cover of Limelight, the Rush song Limelight. And when I did Alex Lifeson's guitar solo on the violin in that one, we were able to find isolated tracks on the internet, so I could pull Alex's solo into the Logic session, hear just that, and then compare how my sound was sounding to his and figure out, okay, well, I think this needs a little ping pong delay here to do this, or his is a little more than mine, I should do this like this. So it's really helpful to kind of create your initial sounds on the computer before you put it into your live rig, and then when you get to the venue, you just have to kind of tweak the gains and things like that. There are a few things that I don't like better in the Helix, but most I like better. I think like anything that has to do with overdrive or chorus or amp modeling or cabinets or anything like that, the Helix is just going to sound better than bringing an amp to the gig. It just does, especially for a violin, not for a guitar player who's got their own sound, but for a violin, the Helix is just better. But for me, I won't give up my Digitech whammy for pitch shifting. It is the only thing that I find has the least amount of artifacts. I can't stand when something sounds like it's being processed. It needs to sound natural. And I often use that to octave down things, and I also use it for the whammy or as a harmonizer, things like that. And I find that pedal works better than all the other options, so I won't lose it from the rig, but it comes with me. And I also use a Morley wah because it has an auto engage, and you may not have to worry about this as much, but as a female who sometimes wears 5 or 6 inch heels on stage, having an auto engage wah that you can also contour the sound of it, it's really helpful. It's like been a game changer for me to not have to be like, oh, did that click on? Did that not click on? I can't feel it through these platforms. I have no idea. So my rig is a little bigger than maybe what it needs to be. But then I have a few like boutique things that are specific to the solos that I'm trying to accomplish live, because I won't record anything on the computer that I can't duplicate live. I don't like to utilize studio tricks. I want to make sure that I can do the same thing in the show if I've done it in one of my videos.
I love that. I mean, you're able to bring like the authentic experience to people and not like, well, we did it this way on the album, but live, it'll be close enough.
Yeah, I don't like to do that. And, I'm working on something that's taken me a year to learn that I'm shooting the video for tomorrow. And I'm going to do like a release for it in a live session so people can ask questions about it. But I worked on this thing for a year, and I haven't practiced that hard since my master's degree, doing like Bach, chaconne and stuff like that. So it doesn't always come easy, and sometimes figuring out the puzzle pieces take a while. And man, I was ready to throw this thing out the window and be like, it's just not physically possible. But I kept with it, and I bought pedals. I sent them back. I bought pedals. I sent them back. Because, you can't just go to Guitar Center and try stuff. They don't have anything in stock. So you got to buy them and ship them and buy them and ship them. And I probably went through 3 or 4 different things till I found something that I was like, this might be workable within the rig. And then I got it sounding good in the studio. But then when I tried to play it through an actual PA system, I was like, holy no. And so it's finally at the 11th hour come to the place where I can make it sound good live and I can make it sound good in the studio. And I'm shooting a video for it tomorrow. So this is going to be like, after this is done, man, I'm going to go just have a beer or 12 because...
I love that. So yeah, people will sometimes in the classical world, they're like, well, they went into rock because it's easier. And sometimes it is easier, but it's not always the case.
It depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to play rock music and sound like a violinist, which a lot of people do, and they're great players and they're virtuoso players. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing to hear this guitar solo played on a violin, but it sounds like a violin. If you want to play a guitar solo or rock music and you want to sound like the guitar, now you're getting into things that aren't comfortable on the violin, like bending strings and, adjusting. I have to do alternate tunings on half of the stuff that I record because the guitar player might have an open B string and I don't have an open B string. So, I mean, I did a cover of the Beatles, The End, where the 3 Beatles do 3 different guitar solos every 2 bars, and I tuned every violin differently for the 3 of them to make it sound the way it does on the recording, because if I just played it sounding like a violin, it didn't have the same feel. But when you get it, and you're like, yeah, now that sounds like what they intended with that solo. And you got to mess with it for a while, and once I figured out the alternate tunings on that, it went a lot faster. But there's no tutorial on YouTube telling me how to do that on a 7-string violin. So,
absolutely. Well, we've got some of your videos. I'd love to play them, and then you can kind of talk people through maybe what was the process in getting that sound. Would that be cool?
Sure.
That was nasty. Very nice. Why don't you tell people what was the process there? How'd you do that?
So the first thing that you have to do to play that solo is you have to go to your local drugstore and you have to buy a package of round garage sale sticker labels and stick them on your violin so that it looks like Randy Rhoads' Flying V. After that step is complete, I think I researched the solo. I kind of looked into what amp he was using and what effects he was using and things like that. And we ended up putting, I think the kind of like the stereo chorus effect is pretty prominent on that solo. But also one thing I found when I was reading up on how he recorded that solo is that he double tracked it. And that has a huge impact on the way that it sounds. So I actually, in that video, I double tracked the solo. I recorded it once and then I played it on top of myself playing it. And then it really sounded like him. I think when I had played it once, you know, okay, but then double tracking it, it's like that's what he did. That's the trick to making it sound like that, with that super kind of chorusy type vibe to it. So that was something that, you know, I didn't duplicate 2 videos of myself in that video, but by playing it on top of myself playing it, I was able to achieve the same kind of thing that he did when he recorded it. I also, obviously, we don't have like a whammy bar. You know, we can't throw a Floyd Rose into a violin. So I used the Digitech whammy to achieve that. And I'm actually thinking of going back and re-recording that one, because I didn't do any tapping in that version of that. I recorded that a few years ago. And really the whole reason I bought a Viper violin was to see if that was possible with the frets, because on a fretless violin it's, you know, not going to happen. So I might re-record it with the tapping in there again to get it even more authentic. But
yeah, I had sort of maybe spent a good 2 or 3 minutes trying to figure out tapping on my violin, and like, well, you know, I didn't figure it out in 2 minutes and I moved on. But there's a kid, he goes by Bow Breakers, who does a ton of tapping and stuff on all the socials, and since I've seen him do it, I've seen a few other people do it, and it is 100% possible.
I've seen the Bow Breakers. I think his name's Liam. He actually sent me a message, and I watched some of his videos. And at that time, like, he is the only other person I had ever seen doing it. I haven't seen anyone else but him do it. And so it took me a good long time to figure it out. And I think my family was ready to kill me. I sounded like a train catching on fire and then hitting a semi. And these were the sounds emitting from my instrument for a really long time, until everything came together, the technique of how to do it with the effects chain and everything else. Definitely not an easy thing to achieve. And it's like learning a whole new instrument, because you're not used to knowing what notes are going on with this finger. You know, it's not something you learn from the time you're 6 years old. So it was like learning a new instrument. And I think that nobody really thought I was ever going to make it happen, because it sounded so bad for so long.
That's one of the cool things about social media. You know, when I first started doing this, and probably you too, before social media, all of this was sort of parallel path evolution. We were each one of us trying to figure it out on our own. And since there's social media now, people are posting things. You can go, oh, well, it looks like somebody has already solved that problem. Maybe I can reach out to them and they can tell me what they did. And my experience has been that most of the violinists that I've talked to have been very open about, yeah, sure, I'll tell you what I did.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes fixing one problem creates 2 more. And I went through a lot of that. It was a process. But I think that of all of the guitar players that I've covered their solos, by far the most difficult is covering Eddie Van Halen the way that Eddie is supposed to sound. Like I said, you can find videos of people doing Eddie solos on violin, sounding like a violin. I haven't seen one where they really sound like Eddie. So I kind of made it a mission. I'm like, I ain't learning anything else until I can play like Eddie. That's it. I will put out nothing. I know that I'm going to lose followers because I don't have content going out, but I'm not going to do one more thing until I can play like Eddie. And so that's kind of what I spent the last 6 months doing. I don't think it's fair that Comfortably Numb has 2 of the greatest solos in rock history in one stinking song. That's another one that you've done. Let's listen to your version of that, and then you can kind of talk about it for us. DVD 205 was one of my very first good electric violins, and I've had it for years and years. Obviously, you know, it's discontinued now. And the newer model Yamahas they came out with, I have the YEV, but I skipped over the 255. I never changed over to that one because I didn't like having the external. I have so much stuff on myself when I perform anyway that I don't need an extra thing on me, and I don't need adapters and extra cables that can go bad. So I just kept the 205 and got a couple extra bridges for it because, you know, you have to replace them every now and then. But I like the way it sounded, and it's easy to play because the neck is narrow and I have really tiny hands. So for a long time, that was my go-to violin. And when I recorded Comfortably Numb, this was one of the first videos I made during COVID, and I think I might have even still been pregnant in that video. I'm not sure, but it was a early one, and I didn't even own a Viper yet. So that was my performing violin at the time. But I always record David Gilmour solos on a fretless instrument. I've also done Time, and I recorded that on a fretless 5-string Viper. Slightly different sound than the Yamaha, but I think they were the right choices for the two songs, Comfortably Numb and Time. You have to really capture that floaty quality with David Gilmour's stuff. And this was an early video. I think in the last 2 years, I've learned a lot for audio engineering and mixing and things like that. Back in those days, right after COVID happened, or maybe that was more than 2 years ago now. God, there was like a vortex of time from COVID to now, like what happened. But I couldn't even engineer myself on a recording back then. So I had to have Brody do everything for me. Now he kind of comes in at the end of the process and just he'll do the master mix for me, but I'm able to get it in there and, you know, engineer myself and everything like that. But back then I didn't know how to do that. So I was trying to be as efficient as possible all the time with everything because, you know, you got someone else there like, did you nail it yet? Okay. So, but he helped a lot with that sound, I remember. And, you know, one of the biggest things with Gilmour, again, is like this chorus effect. And also the way that you use the slides and the way that you use the harmonics. He hits some really important harmonics in the Comfortably Numb solo. And I wanted to make sure that I could hit those same harmonics on the violin. And the one thing that bothered me about that solo, even though I think it's my most popular one, like the most views out of any of the solos I've posted, but there's one note, the solo goes down and I think it hits a low B, and the 5-string violin only went down to a low C. Now I couldn't detune that string because it would mess up all my fingering for all the other stuff I have to do on that string. So that actually inspired me to go and get a 6-string violin at that point, because I was like, no, I can't do this. I know it's only one note. I had to go and post, and we had to pitch correct the open. I played an open C and we had to pitch it down to a B to hit that really low note. And I'm like, but never again am I ever going to do that. I'm going to have the notes that I'm going to play. So at that point, I found like a used 6-string fretted Viper on eBay, because the wait to get one was so long at that time. So I got lucky and found one on eBay and bought that. And then after that, I realized 6-string still wasn't enough. So then I had a custom made 7-string after that.
Yeah, the 6-string gets you within a half a step. But so that's what I do. I write all my own stuff for my show, and if I need an E power chord, I just invert it. But I don't have the ability to play an open E unless I reach up and detune it.
When I did the Purple Haze solo, I just tuned down to a low E, but that one worked with in the context of the fingering. I didn't really need to do a lot of stuff on the E string. I just needed it to hit that low E. So I tuned the F down to an E. But, you know, for some of the other stuff that I do, I use all 7 strings for it.
Well, that's the cool thing about a lot of guitar solos, too, is that they're generally working up the neck. And there's a lot of guitar solos that you can play note for note on a 5-string violin.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? It's easier to play a 5-string violin when you can.
Yeah, to me, 6 is about as easy as a 5, but 7 starts getting pretty stinking hard.
Yeah, it's a big learning curve. The 6 was a big learning curve because my hands are so small, like painfully small hands. So the 5-string seemed big at the time. Then when I got the 6 string, I was like, okay, you actually have to change the angle that you're holding the instrument to reach the low notes. And then I have to readjust the angle that I'm holding the instrument when I'm playing the high notes if my bow is going to hit at the correct angle. Because otherwise, your arm's here or here. And so I actually started to adjust my left shoulder instead of my bow arm to try and hit everything in a more even context. And then the 7 string, when you're in those middle notes, like the C string and the G string, they're like, millimeters when you're hitting the other string. It's difficult, and it took a lot of practicing to be able to feel comfortable on like the low 4 strings.
Yeah, there are certain advantages to being bigger. I'm 6 feet tall, so I don't have to move as much on the instrument. But with the extended range instruments, you do learn to get a whole lot more accurate with the angles on your right arm. And then you go back to a 4 string, you're like, oh my God, this is so easy.
I just recorded something with my acoustic violin, my good classical violin. And I was like, this feels like a toy. What is this? It's so tiny.
We've got another tune here. This is one of your tunes, right?
Yeah, I think I sent you one of my originals, a little clip of it, not a full thing.
I love that.
Thanks.
So one of the things that I played in cover bands for years and years, and you learn how to play other people's music. And sometimes you're like, well, what even is my voice? What would I write if I'm going to write? But then once you decide what you're going to write, all the stuff that you learned while you're learning how to play covers, you can apply to your stuff, right?
That's exactly it. And like you mentioned before about jazz, the couple jazz courses I took in college, the first thing they tell you is find solos that you think are really great and transcribe them, because you're going to learn how to be a better soloist by doing so. And I think because I did so much of that, I was able to take bits and pieces from all of these people who have influenced me and put it into my own kind of thing. I didn't use any guitars on that track. I played bass, but the rhythm guitar was the 7-string violin, and then the lead guitar was the 6-string violin.
Yeah, guitars are silly instruments anyway.
Yeah, right. Except they're way easier to tap on.
Yeah, both of my rock albums didn't have any guitar on them. But then when I've started playing some live shows, I'm like, I actually do enjoy having a guitar player to do some comping while I'm soloing. It's kind of nice. We'll just let him stand in the back there.
Yeah, we have a 3-piece band behind us in our show. Even though there's 4 string players and we do a lot of the guitar stuff, some of these songs have 3 or 4 guitars on them, so it's always helpful to have an actual guitar player on stage holding down some of the rhythm stuff.
That, and you can send them for food and stuff when you're hungry.
Yeah, and they usually help you lift the heavy cases and things like that, so they're useful sometimes. The drummers, they never want to lift the cases, which you'd think they'd like to because they play the drums, but they're always the ones that don't like to lift the cases. It's crazy.
Well, because they usually had to bring in like 400 of their own cases, and by then they're tired.
Yeah, I guess that's the reason. But oh yeah, touring is fun. But on original little snippet there, you can hear like a little bit of Eddie Van Halen, a little bit of Joe Satriani influence, everybody that I've kind of listened to and transcribed or learned from, kind of put in there. And I wanted it to really not sound like a violin at all. I think it doesn't sound like a violin, so I achieved that.
Yeah, you did a great job. Sounds great to me. So if you're doing guitar stuff or guitar covers on the internet, there's always going to be dudes that just feel like they've got to weigh in at some point and try to mansplain exactly what you're doing wrong or whatever. You've never encountered that, right?
Oh, no. You've been following my stuff long enough to see that I don't put up with any of it. I think sometimes people enjoy my banter with these sorts of people more than they even enjoy my covers of the solos. But I'm a Buffalo Italian. I don't put up with it.
That one of the ones that somebody tried to come after you was this tune we're going to hear next, and then the original artist was like, I'm not going to sit here and listen to any of this. So let's. Posted that, there were some people that felt like they needed to weigh in on maybe something that you were not doing to their satisfaction, and then Peter Frampton jumped in, right?
There's always people that are like, oh, you're just miming to the original recording. That's not you. Like, why you gotta fake, you know? And then Peter Frampton shares it on his own page, and he says, I'm so honored that you learned me note for note. I don't think I could even learn me note for note or something like that. And he shared it on his Twitter page and on his Facebook page. And I earned a follow from Peter Frampton for that. And, that album is one of the most important live albums in rock music history. So it was pretty exciting when I heard from the man himself.
Yeah, it's always a little validating, right?
Yeah, definitely. So far, none of the original artists have reached out and been like, just stop. That sucks. So it's been all good feedback so far.
My experience with trolls on the internet, I have yet to see a single person drop negative nonsense into somebody's feed. And then I go to their page and I'm like, oh, that guy's actually really amazing. He's earned the right to say whatever he wants.
That's because people who really are amazing don't do that sort of thing. They're comfortable enough with themselves that if someone asks them for constructive criticism or advice, they can offer it, but they don't send it out unsolicited. You know, I always fight with people on my page because they'll be like, oh, you can't take constructive criticism. I'm like, well, listen, here's the thing about constructive criticism. One, it means that you have the person's best interest at heart. Number two, it means that you have some sort of expertise to be offering constructive criticism. And these people who say that they're offering it, they don't have either. So, that's the thing about constructive criticism.
Boom. Well said. I love that. So Talkbox with electric violin, I've only seen a couple different people do that. My professor, Rudolph Haken at Illinois, does some. Nate Gonti does some. And then you're the third person I've seen do it. Talk to me a little bit about how you figured out Talkbox and violin, because it's hard.
Yeah, it's you don't have a lot of leeway with your sound with the Talkbox. There's a couple knobs on it. And, you can't go in there because you're going through a vocal microphone. It's difficult to be able to have the wide range of ways that you can edit and make it work for the violin. So a lot of it is in your technique that you use. And it was hard for me in the beginning to be able to, I actually did this live in the show before I recorded that solo. So this was one of the things that's been in our show since the beginning. I just bought one, plugged it in, and then kind of sounded like I was choking on a turkey sandwich for a while, but eventually figured out you have to super over enunciate all of your mouth movements. And, there's just no way to really make it not look a little bit silly. But when I kind of started practicing over enunciating the mouth shapes, it helped a lot. And I think a lot of getting good sound out of it is the range that you're playing the instrument in and your ability to, manipulate the mouth tube, for lack of a better way of explaining it. But I also find that it sounds way better on the low strings of the 6 and 7 string than it does up in the high range. So luckily, like in the Peter Frampton solo, a lot of it is in the kind of lower to mid range. So I didn't have to do a lot of it up in the super high notes. It's kind of like a wah, you know, like if you're trying to do a wah and you're playing up on like a high G, you're not even going to hear it. There's nowhere for the filter to pass through. So play in the low octave so that you can get the grit, and then practice enunciating your words with it.
Yeah, my guess is that Peter Frampton discovered kind of the same thing about high notes and low notes, which is why he played them in the low register while he was doing that.
Yeah, definitely. The talk box, like I said, it's pretty simple. There's not a lot to deal with to make that sound. But after the talk box part was done, he switches over and plays a regular guitar solo. And I think there's like a rotary sound on that, if I remember, could be with my second half of that solo. I think it was one of the ones that I kind of captured the mood of the original artist better than some of the other things that I've done. But I recorded it on a separate day. I did the talk box first, and then people kept asking me to finish the solo. So I don't know, 6 months later, I went back and I recorded the guitar solo at the end of it. But it's cool sounding because it has that rotary sound.
I love a rotary sound on the violin. I just did a performance in Louisville, Kentucky, where I did some rotary stuff on that. And it's not a thing that I've used a whole lot, but the few places where it's the right thing to do, it is so tasty.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I'm lucky that Brody's a keyboard player, because that's one of those sounds that, you know, he's good at dialing in, helping dial in.
There are a few things like the whammy pedal that the Helix supposedly has modeled the whammy, and it's one of those that they didn't quite get it all the way right. And the rotary in the Helix isn't my favorite either. I used it in this particular case because it was like, 15 seconds or something. It wasn't worth bringing a bunch of extra pedals to Kentucky. But there are reasons to have external pedals, even with something as powerful as the Helix sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking at my rig down here, and I got 5 or 6 extra things that travel with me all the time. And then I have a couple that I use only if I'm performing something specific. But I think we actually got that kind of rotary sound with a Logic plugin. I don't think I used the Helix for it, actually.
Yeah, let's talk about the Rush. You talked about Rush before. Alex Lifeson, I guess, had reached out to you about some stuff. One of my favorite bands of all time, fantastic band. You went after Limelight, which is like you gotta put your boots on to go after that one.
Yeah, definitely. So the idea to cover Limelight came about because it was my birthday in last July, and Brody had forgotten until like 6 hours before my birthday. And so he decided to save himself from that by buying me a Rickenbacker bass that I've wanted my entire life. And even when I was old enough to be able to afford one, I still just never got around to getting one. So it was a good save. But there's 3 people that we're going to have to cover if I've got a Rickenbacker bass, and Geddy Lee is one of them. So we covered Limelight, and he laid down the drum part first, and then I laid down Geddy's bass part. And then I did the solo last. And this is like one of those solos that it's very visceral, and it's not notey or anything like that, but capturing the intention and the musicality of it and this kind of dreamlike visceral quality to it is really important. And I spent a lot of time kind of hemming and hawing over it, not about the notes, but between which ones of the notes I was going to do portamento on and which ones I was going to do whammy on, and within the whammy, what the setting was going to be. And because there's a very fine line between sounding like Alex Lifeson and sounding like Eddie Van Halen or Joe Satriani, and I didn't want to walk that line because I like to try and do justice to the solos that I'm working on. So I really worked a long time practicing this a bunch of different ways with the slides until I finally came to a combination of portamento and whammy on the specific setting. And then being able to isolate his track in Logic, I found the stem online, and being able to try and match the delay to his was very helpful. This is another one that it got a lot of views and a lot of comments. Rush fans are very educated fans. They know what they're talking about, and they have a certain expectation, and 99.9% of the responses were positive. I'm like, oh, I should only do Rush songs because these people are a lot more polite than some of these other people that leave comments on my videos. But anyways, there was a lot of people who thought that I was just miming the Alex's solo because it sounded close enough where people thought that was the case. And the funniest thing was Alex commented on the Instagram video, like himself. He commented on the video, and then the very next comment after him was a guy saying, "You're just miming to the original recording." And I'm like, the guy right above you is the original recording. That's him. How could you say that, you idiot? So that was funny about that. But yeah, I always love learning Rush songs. We do like a 12-minute long Rush medley in our show, and I'm going to be probably tackling La Villa Strangiato soon on bass and guitar. Well, on violin as guitar, not on guitar. But that's kind of the Rush song that hooked me, so it's always been kind of right on my radar for something I have to learn and to put out there. And now that I've finished this new thing that I'm filming tomorrow, I can move on to some more Rush.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. I want to get one more kind of big piece of advice from you, and then I'll let you get back to your life. Thank you for taking your time to do this. But what advice would you give if you just had sort of one thing to tell a violinist, like a violinist who wants to start going after guitar parts? What's maybe the biggest piece of advice you have on how to make a violin sound more like a guitar?
So I have a video, maybe like a 10-minute long video on YouTube where I kind of talk about my process towards learning and recording guitar solos. So if anyone wants a more in-depth explanation, you can find it on my YouTube channel. But to summarize everything, I would say 1, transcribe. 2, don't plug into anything and figure out how. Figure out bending strings, figure out harmonics, figure out the signature styles of a guitar player and how to make it sound exactly like that on the violin. 3, play in the correct octave, because violinists tend to take everything up the octave, and then you no longer sound like the guitar, you sound like the violin. So playing in the correct octave is important. And then I would say once you've learned how to do with your physical hands the techniques that the guitar player uses and you've learned all the notes, then you create your effects chain. It's the last thing that you do. And it's always good to study what the original player did, how they recorded it, what amps did they use, what level was the amp turned up to, are they using chorus, is there a wah, where are they using the whammy technique, things like that. Hammer-ons, pull-offs, tapping, anything like that. You assess all of that stuff. And you create your effects chain. And that's the last thing you do. And it's good to mess with things. And even if you're just starting out, if you have a good board like the Helix, go through the presets and just play through everything. And chances are probably out of 100 patches, there's going to be 5 that sound really good without you having to do anything. Take them and look at them and look what they did to make that patch, and then you can build your own around that. And that's kind of what I did in the beginning, was I'd find the preset that I thought sounded pretty good, and then I kind of tweak it for what I was trying to do. So even if you have no experience building a chain, you can learn by looking at some of those presets and the order of things. And even by moving your pedals to a different location in the chain, it can drastically change the sound, especially where you put the overdrive in relation to the amp. Like, I actually think I read something, maybe it was Vernon Reid, who was talking about using the helix and moving it to the middle of the amp and the cabinet, and making a big difference in his tone, like just made it like that much more special. So just play with it. Like, take hours, take days, and just play with the sounds and see what sounds best, and learn about EQ and compression. I hated them at first, but honestly, after doing as much recording as I do, they are your friend.
Yeah, those are two of like the least sexy effects, but they're probably more important than any of the other ones.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to just throw on an overdrive or throw on an amp and change the gain, but to really, really have a good EQ curve and the proper compression settings is something that kind of like engineers tend to, have more experience with than performers. And so learning a bit about that will also help you in a live setting when you got someone doing things to your sound that's not you. So
yeah, we will definitely put up a link to that video that you're talking about. We'll put it up on the screen when you're talking about it there.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate your expertise and a chance to finally talk to you in person. We've interacted a lot online. Where can people find you and find your music, and how can they come see you play live?
So our tour schedule is posted at femsofrock.com. That's my production show, and we're pretty busy this spring and summer, so we'll be to a lot of different places. My socials are Nina DiGregorio on Facebook and at Nina M DiGregorio on Instagram. They're both verified, and there's like hundreds of fake people, so don't follow the fake people. I'm not gonna ask you for money on Telegram. That's not me. So I'm also on, well, I guess not Twitter, but X now, and TikTok as well.
All right. Sorry, it took me a second. I was actually I said that I would put the link to that video on the screen, and I did so on our YouTube version, but I just dropped it into the comments section here. So sorry, it took me just a second to get back to you guys. What a fun interview for me, man. I really, really enjoyed hanging out with Nina, and I got rid of my beard since then. But yeah, great times, and she's obviously amazing at what she does. This Effects on Violins series has been a lot of fun. I might have maybe one more of these coming your way, but I think we're more or less done here. And yeah, there might be one or two more of these coming, kind of piecemeal over the summer, but this is kind of the last weekly live stream that we're going to be every week. We're going to be hitting, at least for the summer. I've got a ton of other projects I'm trying to get done for you guys. And it's just, I don't have time to do this every single week and get all these other recording projects done. We're trying to update our website and get a lot more instrument demos and stuff. I want to have a fairly extensive demo for each single instrument that we have, where you can A/B compare these against each other. And that's going to be a ton of work. So yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for hanging all these Wednesdays and doing all this stuff with me. It's been a lot of fun. And we'll still do some live streams here and there, but it's not going to be a regular thing, at least throughout the summer. We may start back up in the fall. I don't know. We'll see. I have no idea. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you guys for hanging out, and catch you next time, if there's a next time.